The last of our iconic figures is Sir Robert Mark, who became Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police in 1972. Faced with evidence of widespread corruption, Mark pledged to purge all bent detectives from the force.
With my colleagues, I have set out to make virtue fashionable. A bent detective not only is himself a wrongdoer, not only does he do irreparable harm to a body of men who little deserve to be discredited in that way, but he harms the whole fabric of public confidence and the confidence of the courts in the police. And so far as I'm concerned, he will always be a prime target, and he can look to no mercy at all from me.
Mark had been Chief Constable of Leicester when he was first brought into the Met as Assistant Commissioner. He said later he was made to feel as welcome as a leper at a colonial governor's garden party. He found Scotland Yard a secretive Masonic place, with its own inbred culture. The plainclothes detectives of the CID looked down on the uniform branch, and it was in the CID that corruption had been allowed to flourish. In a sting operation, the Times had exposed detectives faking evidence, taking bribes, and blackmailing criminals. And just as Mark took the top job, the People produced a damaging splash story. It said the head of the flying squad, Ken Drury, had shared a Mediterranean holiday with the Soho porn baron James Humphreys. Humphreys had picked up the tab. Ken Drury stood down from his job, protesting his innocence, and claiming he'd actually been in the Mediterranean looking for Ronnie Biggs, the great train robber.
It's no good going to the Vicar's Tea Party and trying to gain information about the activities of organised teams of robbers. If these teams commit highly organised crime, they will spend certainly a lot of their proceeds in places like the West End, or go to Spain, getting rid of their ill-gotten gains.
After lengthy negotiations, Sir Robert Mark in 1975 agreed to give access for TV cameras to film for the very first time inside the normally closed secret world of the Met. He said I could make a film here at Scotland Yard and track the progress of his efforts to stamp out corruption at all levels in the CID. Mark, who was to become known as the Lone Ranger from Leicester, had begun his campaign with a meeting of his top detectives. He told them bluntly he wanted a CID that caught more criminals than it employed.
There wasn't even a discussion. This was an entirely one-sided meeting.
It was said that you actually walked out.
Indeed, but this was simply because I told them exactly what I wanted them to hear, and then left them.
I think he overstated the case, if I might say so, having been an aiming point as to where he was, because I was a CID officer and was a career CID officer of 22 years in the Metropolitan Police.
John Stevens was to rise through the ranks and eventually himself become head of the Met.
When Sir Robert said basically all the CID are corrupt, that was, in my view, wrong, because I was not corrupt, and I knew a lot of my colleagues and friends weren't. But I think he said that in order to get some effect in terms of what he was doing. There's no doubt there was corruption at the highest levels and through some of the structures in the yard.
What did you think the position was, and what did you propose to do?
Well, I thought the position was that the misdeeds of the few and their apparent immunity was harming both the reputation of the bulk of the CID and of the force as a whole, and that I was prepared to do anything that was necessary to correct that.
It's been said to me that you threatened to put all the CID officers back into uniform if it was necessary to correct that.
Well, I don't regard that as a threat. I looked upon it simply as a managerial statement of fact, which I would have been perfectly prepared to implement.
Mark's prime target for reform was the flying squad, which he saw as a force within a force, ever keen to promote its image as the Yard's heavy mob.
The flying squad, they're a fine body of men, they're dedicated, and to do their job they've got to permanently associate with people of the criminal fraternity.
Robert Mark saw it rather differently.
I simply said to detectives, Of course you must mix with criminals, but the criterion you must adopt is that you must mix with them for the public good, not for your own personal profit.
We filmed with a team from the flying squad, keen to be seen as the Sweeney and proud of their underworld contacts.
Most flying squad officers have their own informants, and this is the way we work, strictly through informants. That's to me, there's no other way to work.
The team was led by a detective inspector.
How do you think the criminals regard the flying squad?
I think with a fair amount of awe.
How rough is it?
Oh, it can be a bit rough sometimes. Mind you, I've got 2 wrestlers on my team, that can't be a bad thing. They're good strong boys. They're my bodyguards personal, you see.
His good strong boys were Detective Sergeants Mick Howell and Fred Cutts. They were proud of their easy access to the sleazier parts of Soho in search of information.
What's he big office about?
Very quiet.
Want to have a look around?
Howell and Cutts also had entree to secret Chinese gambling dens. Although Robert Mark had brought in reforms designed to cut back on the flying squad's close contacts with the underworld, the 2 detectives routinely drank in pubs used by what they call the villains as their way of finding out what was going on.
I think the policeman and the villain gets on very well. We've got something in common which is unique. We think like each other. He's looking for ways that he can't be arrested, and we're looking for ways where we can arrest him.
At the end of a hard night's drinking for business, the team relaxed. But Robert Mark feared that the flying squad was always in danger of swallowing its own mythology and behaving as if it were a law unto itself.
What do you say to those detectives who've said to me that you are more concerned with catching bent detectives than you are with catching criminals?
Well, I should say they're right. And I see nothing improper about that. I tried to explain to you that I believe that the effectiveness of the Criminal Investigation Department does not depend upon mystique or hocus pocus or any of the nonsense that you've read in these fictional autobiographies over the last decade or 2. It depends on their effectiveness depends basically on professional skill and training, and then on integrity.
Corruption will always be there. It's endemic. It's a matter of how you control it, which is the important part of it, and allow it. If you allow it to grow, then you're in big trouble. And Sir Robert Mark was all about ensuring that it was kept to the limitations that it was, because it's around, the sums of money that are around, and the temptations are always there. But because the CID were always dealing with what I would call very convincing corruptors, those people who will make it their business to actually try and corrupt police officers and bring them in close, and, if you like, groom them.